Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. We have a very important discussion to have today. Since the war broke out on October 7th, everyone has been asking, how is it possible? How did it happen? How is Israel, how is the IDF not prepared? Well, the IDF recently came out with research and investigation on this topic, and we are going to discuss it and share it with you today. Joining me to do that is Atar Porat. Atar, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Before you begin, just an explanation of who you are. So, our many followers of these briefings understand that at IDSF, we do a lot to make sure that Israel is safe and secure. We work very aggressively with policymakers around the world, educating them. We work with policymakers here in Israel to make sure they have the facts that they need to make informed decisions of how to lead this war. How do you inform these people? How do you know what's right and what's wrong, what's happening on the ground? Well, we have a very robust research department. Our research department looks into, analyzes, assesses all facets of this war and everything related to Israel's national security. We have phenomenal researchers working very hard to uncover the truth to keep Israel safe and secure. Atar has been a critical member of our research department for now 2 years, and it's great to have him here with us to explain to us all that has happened and all that has been revealed in this IDF probe. So that was enough of an intro, Atar. Why don't you jump in and share with us what is really being shown to the public now about the failures of October 7th?
First, thank you very much. So I'll just begin with a brief introduction of myself. I'm a student. I live in Jerusalem, and I have been in the research department, as Moshe has said, for the past 2 years. During the war, I've been writing the weekly briefings of the war, which could be found on our site. It's called ISB. Okay, and we're here to talk about the IDF probes. But before I start, I'd like to recontextualize the discussion. I studied economics, and some of my two favorite economists were James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock. They wrote a great book called The Calculus of Consent, in which they introduce the public choice theory. What it says in a nutshell is it tries to apply economic principles and incentives to bureaucrats and to explain the behavior of bureaucracies and different organizations. And the entire idea is to try to analyze the cost-benefit analysis of each actor. And I think this analysis is very much relevant to the IDF probes because there are a lot of different actors within the IDF, within different units, the chiefs of the security services. Their interests do not always align with the interests of the government echelons. So I'm saying all of this because it's important to keep that in context before I dive deeper into what was published. Um, so, uh, I- so some of the main points that these economists have discussed through is that bureaucracies sustain themselves through institutional inertias, and just like politicians, they're trying to maximize also their budgets and their influence. And I'll get to that later, but keep that in mind because, for example, Ronen Bar, the chief of Shin Bet, has tried to influence the next chief of the Shin Bet. Recently, he has said that to the prime minister, so that's just an example of that. And another point I want to say before diving deeper is that also the Shin Bet has released its probe into the failure of October 7th, and there are many similarities to the 9/11 Commission. For example, there was a failure of sharing information between the Shin Bet and the IDF, very much similar to the FBI and CIA. And also, there was another conclusion, which was underestimation of the threat, which was also seen in the 9/11 Commission. Um, So the report was not published as a whole to the public. We cannot read that. The IDF basically published some short investigations. Some of them were known to the public, and they were disseminated to military correspondents, and that was published in the media, same as the Shin Bet. It is important to note that there were no protocols of the conversations from IDF headquarters. There's no personal blame, um, and it also lays down the failures going 10 years back. So the way it was conducted under what was called a map of investigation, approved by Herzi Halevi, the former chief of staff. He was actually replaced yesterday by the new chief of staff, Eyal Zamir. And it was done under the inspection of the learning division, which was created and headed by a close aide of Herzi Halevi, Colonel Adi Sabag. There were some criticisms about the closeness of Adi Sabag to Herzi Halevi because of obvious potentials of conflicts of interest. By the way, whenever I'm gonna speculate about conflicts of interest, I'm just saying what was published, and I don't want to make accusations, just speculations, because I think it is extremely important to put that in context, especially because not a lot was published in the English language. And it's been a very wild week with the publication of those probes in Israeli media. So many people have made those criticisms. Um, by the way, Moshe, just feel free to cut me short if I go on too long. So the main findings were of three different sections. First of all, it was intelligence, operational, and coordination. So the intelligence failure is the Shin Bet passed information about the SIM cards. I don't know if it has been discussed before, but the IDF got information from the Shin Bet that some SIM cards were turned on the night before by the Hamas operatives, which was a red flag, and they had a meeting in 3:15 in the morning, but they decided to reconvene in the morning, and they believed that something was going on, but basically the IDF chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, decided to reconvene in the morning at 8, and the attack started at 6:29. Um, Another failure of intelligence is that the IDF had a document called the Jericho Wall, which was already discussed in September 2022. And Jericho Wall was basically an invasion plan by Hamas, and the IDF chief of staff was not aware of that plan only after the war started. Another source of failure in intelligence is that there were no human sources in Gaza by the IDF or Shin Bet, which is a serious failure considering the fact that 5,600 terrorists stormed into Israel, and these people were probably telling their mistress, their wives, or their family about this. So we had tens of thousands of people who knew about this, and no one notified any of the security services in Israel. Um, some of the explanations by the IDF and people in the media is that there was no human sources is in part because of a 2018 failed operation in which one senior officer was killed, and they claimed that it was too dangerous and it burned many of their sources. Next, there was the operational failure. So first of all, there was lack of adequate forces in the Southern Command. There were not a lot of fighting soldiers. So one of the most um, uh, one of the most disastrous failures was the Nahal Oz base. The IDF released the investigation of that battle. It was among 40 battles that the IDF investigated in this probe. And it's important to note that some of the battles were already shown in before. For example, the Be'eri battle was discussed in July, and the Air Force had its investigation published in December, and it showed that there was lack of preparedness with the Air Force. There were not enough helicopters in combat readiness. In the Nachal Oz base, it was shown that in the IDF, what they usually do, they do something called dawn preparedness, which is to prepare for battle during dawn, because historically that's when battle started. So there were not enough soldiers. They did not follow protocol, and also there were less soldiers than usual in that base. In the IDF, usually, um, when you're a combat soldier, you do what we call 17-4. It means you serve 17 days at base and then you go 4 days at home, which is basically means that every 3 weeks you go home. So they lowered it into 11-3. Basically, you go back every 2 weeks. So when the attack happened, there were less troops on base. And also, they winded down the number of troops because it was the holidays. The investigation found that over 5,600 terrorists stormed the Gaza envelope, and they had to fight against a mere 767 IDF troops. The terrorists broke in 114 points in the fence. Meanwhile, 4,000 rockets flew over Israel. Um, and the terrorists came in 3 waves. Most of the kidnappings and the killings and all of the atrocities that we saw, these were done in the morning by 12. Most of the hostages were taken, all 251 of them. It is important to note that some of the terrorists managed to be held off by the rapid response teams in the kibbutzim, which bought time. But the next waves of terrorists came, and the IDF did not come in time, which is a massive failure. And during the morning, around 8, Muhammad Def, basically the Hamas chief of staff, the commander of the brigades, of the Hamas brigades, told Gazans to storm into Israel. So there are even more thousands of citizens that stormed into Gaza. Much of the failure was due to the fact that the Gaza division, which basically coordinated everything, its leadership was basically decapitated because many of the commanders were killed. So there was not the IDF was not able to coordinate between different units and really get responsibilities and get a situational assessment. Um, I'll go over the night of October 7th, which some of the revelations were really shocking. As I said before about the SIM cards, they found out that the SIM cards were activated, and recently it was published that they found out that some of them were activated also 2 days before the attack. So in the night of the attack, they weren't sure what this meant. So they had a situational assessment during the night, and they had 3 possibilities to analyze this. So first of all, they thought that maybe Hamas is conducting an exercise, which is Hamas does it from time to time, or they're planning an attack, not as big as October 7th. And the third option was that Hamas is fearing an Israeli operation and is increasing its preparedness. And the Shin Bet came to the conclusion that it was better not to raise combat readiness because they were afraid that it would push Hamas to escalate, and also they wanted to basically keep the calm, which is what has been called in Israeli sources, Israeli media, the conceptia, the preconception, basically trying to appease Hamas or try to take a more dovish stance on Hamas. These are the 2 theses that were flown around Israeli media, and I'm saying all of this because obviously the Shin Bet is denying this and saying that they were not part of the conceptia, or they say that they believed Hamas had not been deterred, despite the fact that ever since the 2021 operation or war that took place, that was Guardian of the Wall. Basically, the heads of Shin Bet and the IDF and the Israeli government said that Hamas was deterred. That those were the claims, but in the Shin Bet probe, they said that they never actually believed that Hamas was deterred. As I said in my introduction, a lot of different actors are trying to make themselves look as good as they can under the circumstances. And some other catastrophic failures is that that were laid out in Israeli media is that the information about the Sims was passed a few days before to the Gaza division, but it was actually buried in the emails, and they did not open this information. And it's almost comical, if it were not that sad, that the person that was responsible for the Palestinian case in the Gaza division, she was woken up during the night and tried contacting the person on shift in the intelligence division in the Gaza division. But that person, which was a junior officer, did not have the security clearance to actually read the information. So if they wanted to access their computer, they could not get that. And the military intel of what was happening, I'm talking about the night, not about the start of the attack. That information was passed on WhatsApp groups and not through the military channels. One of those groups was even called the Crazy Ones. So the IDF, many of its mid-ranking brass basically passed information on WhatsApp groups. Another interesting point is that the Air Force was not included in those discussions during the night. It got its own intel, but because they were not part of the situational assessments during the night of October 6th and October 7th, no one could connect the dots. And the IDF chief of staff, the IDF intelligence chief was woken up during the night, but he was on vacation and he believed that the Southern Command, as long as they have all the information, they're going to be fine. So he just went back to sleep. Um, and yeah, that's mainly the what was published. I could go on the Shin Bet investigation, but maybe Moshe, if you have any questions right now, I think would be a good place
Yeah,
to.
Atar, first of all, thank you for sharing all of this in such an organized fashion. It's incredibly helpful. And as you said, much of this has not really been thoroughly published in English, so it's very helpful to many of our viewers. I'm wondering if there's any clarity on what level of leadership in the IDF is where the breakdown happened. Meaning, on the one hand, we know that reservists showed up in mass to do everything they could to fight very hard. So it wasn't on that lowest level of soldier. And it can only have been the chief of staff. So where was the issue? Was it just that the upper echelons? How far down did it go? Is there any indication of that?
I think it is, as I said before, with my introduction about the public choice theory within the IDF and the way that they were conducting the investigation, everyone is trying to um, basically cover their friends. So you have to remember that the people conducting the investigation, many of them are basically investigating either their commanders or their colleagues. I won't say names, but it's very difficult to have an unbiased investigation, knowing that the people who do the investigation have also sometimes conflicts of interest, and organizations tend to, protect their own. It's important to note that this is an internal IDF probe. It's meant for improvement, and not all of the failures were investigated, and not all of them were published. So it is very hard to actually know how deep this goes. I think my personal opinion is that it's very difficult to relegate responsibility because the entire system failed. So of course there are people who bear the brunt of most of the responsibility, but because of this epistemic challenge of the investigation is very hard to know. And as we can see, many people from the IDF and from the Shin Bet are already, giving statements to the media against the government, or the government is also giving statements against some heads of the Shin Bet and the IDF. And this was very similar during the Yom Kippur War, when we had the Agranat probe. It was part of a public inquiry. And during the probe, the government tried to cover itself up. Eventually, the IDF was the one to blame, because there is so much at stake with the most horrible disaster that had befallen Israel. I think the investigation in of itself should need to be investigated, how it's done. I mean, we have also the state controller that tried to investigate it. And actually, the director general of the state controller said that the IDF and the Shin Bet don't cooperate with them, and that it took them over 10 months to get some of the material from the IDF and the Shin Bet. They still don't have all the information. And even the courts, the Israel's Supreme Court, has ruled that the IDF must allow the state controller to investigate it. And the director general of the state controller went on a few Israeli media channels and said that they are trying to drag their feet, not cooperate, and there's still many parts missing. For example, other security forces during October 7th, like the police or the Zaka. So still, it's a very, very limited picture from what has been published. And because there are so many media campaigns from all of the interested parties, it is very important to remember that in context. So I wouldn't draw conclusions, very decisive conclusions, because there is this self-preservation interests from all the actors involved.
And any thoughts on how this is being received in Israeli society right now? Are people just pointing their fingers at this lack of transparency, or do you think there are audiences that are truly receptive to these findings?
I think that I'll try not to get into internal Israeli politics, but many people are trying to have criticisms that are political, but they dress them up as defending um, either some parts of the security services. So I think it really does depend on the trust is we live in a very divided society. So I think the trust in those investigations depend on where you lie on the political spectrum. And I think that's one of the most disastrous outcomes, the fact that we do not have this trust and transparency in those investigations, because many people try to politicize them. And we need to have an inquiry that everyone can trust in order to actually improve. And I think there's still a lot of criticisms, especially from bereaved parents who did not get the full picture of how their loved ones have perished. Um, and it's unfortunate, and it's ongoing. So we're going to have to see the repercussions in Israeli society.
Now, one of the great puzzles or mysteries of October 7th is the lack of communication between the military leadership and the political leadership of the country. Has anything been published on that piece in terms of what the government knew, what the Minister of Defense knew? Or is this probe exclusively within the rank and file of the IDF and the Shin Bet?
It's mainly some of the criticisms about the probe, especially the Shin Bet probe. Many people from the Shin Bet claimed that it was very political because it did not only focus on the intelligence failure, but tried to blame the government for a 10-year long policy of, not 10-year long, but a policy of many years of giving Qatari money to Hamas. By the way, Qatar issued a statement condemning Shin Bet for accusing them, which is very unusual for Qatar to do this. So the probe, the IDF probe mainly looks at the tactical battles, some of the intelligence failures, but some commentators have said that they don't investigate the crux of the failure within the IDF, and some of it is because we live in such a hyper politicized world. Some of what has not been published could be interpreted as basically attacking the government. By the way, the government and some ministers have attacked the probe also from their point of view. not going into the crux of the problem. I didn't see the entire probe because it has not been published to the audiences, to the Israeli public. You can't find it on the IDF side or the Shin Bet side. It has only been disseminated to certain military correspondents, and through them we can know more or less what are the main points of the probes.
Atar Porat, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And thank you for all of the work that you do behind the scenes in the IDSF Research Department, informing all of us. It's really a great pleasure to have you on this briefing, and I hope you will join me again. There are many more conversations we can have with the different research that I know that you do. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you next week, Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.